Most people think charm is something you're born with, like height, or a jawline, or the ability to tell a story that somehow starts with ordering coffee and ends with getting chased by a goat in rural Portugal. You either have it or you don't. That's a story we've all been sold. And it's complete nonsense. In fact, some of the most charming people you'll ever meet aren't naturally charismatic at all. They're not the loudest person in the room. They're not the funniest. They're not even the most confident. They just understand one weird little truth that most people miss. Charm is not about being interesting, it's about making people feel interesting. And the second you understand that, socializing starts feeling a lot less like a performance and a lot more like a conversation. Now, here's the problem. Most people walk into social situations with the exact opposite goal. They're trying to win, trying to impress, trying to prove they belong there. They want the perfect joke, the perfect story, the perfect comeback. Every interaction becomes a tiny audition. And look, I get it. You don't want people to think you're boring. The funny thing is, that's exactly what makes you boring. Because when you're constantly thinking about yourself, you're not actually present. You're not listening. You're waiting, waiting for your turn to speak, waiting for an opening to tell your story. Meanwhile, the genuinely charming person is doing something much simpler. They're paying attention. That's it. Not in a creepy FBI surveillance way, just enough to make the other person feel seen. I call this the spotlight principle. And yes, it sounds like something a self help author would charge $19.99 for. Stay with me. The spotlight principle is simple. Most people think charm comes from standing in the spotlight. The charming person knows the spotlight works better when it's pointed at someone else. Think about the people you've instantly liked, not the celebrities, not the influencers, actual people, the coworker you always enjoy talking to, the friend of a friend who somehow makes every conversation feel easy. Why did you like them? Usually because they made you feel good when you were around them. Not because they performed a one-man comedy special, not because they listed their achievements. They listened. They noticed things. They asked questions that didn't sound like they were reading from a networking handbook. They made you feel like you mattered. And humans absolutely love that feeling. We're all a little self-obsessed. Me, you, everyone. Which sounds harsh until you realize it's actually useful. People spend most of their lives thinking about themselves, their problems, their goals, their insecurities. So when someone comes along and genuinely focuses on them for a few minutes, it's surprisingly powerful. It's like being handed water in a desert. Let me show you what this looks like. Imagine you're at a party. You meet someone new. Most people immediately ask, "So what do you do?" And now you've accidentally turned a conversation into a LinkedIn profile. Congratulations. Instead, the charming person notices something. Maybe the person has a camera hanging around their neck. Maybe they're wearing a shirt from a place you've been. Maybe they seem weirdly excited about the chips table. You make an observation, you follow your curiosity, you let them talk. Suddenly, you're having an actual conversation instead of exchanging human business cards. Or maybe you're on a date. Everyone's nervous. Everyone's pretending they're not nervous. You could spend the entire evening trying to sound impressive, or you could get curious. Ask about the thing they're weirdly passionate about. Ask why they laughed at that specific joke. Ask how they got into that hobby that sounds absurdly niche. People light up when they talk about things they care about. And when they light up, they associate that feeling with you. That's the sneaky part. The charming person isn't creating the feeling, they're creating the space for the feeling. Now, before you think this means becoming some kind of professional interviewer, let's clear something up. Charm isn't interrogation. Nobody enjoys talking to someone who asks questions like they're trying to solve a murder. Relax. The goal isn't to collect data. The goal is genuine curiosity. And people can tell the difference. When you're actually curious, your questions naturally lead somewhere. When you're faking it, every question feels like another box being checked. The conversation dies faster than a plant in my apartment, which brings us to something even more important. Most people underestimate how much charm comes from making people feel comfortable, not impressed, comfortable. Huge difference. Because think about it, a drunk comedian can be hilarious. A drunk comedian can have everyone's attention, but that doesn't automatically make them charming. Why? Because charm isn't measured by how much attention you get. It's measured by how relaxed other people feel around you. That's why the most charming person in a room is often not the loudest person. They're usually the easiest person to talk to. The person who doesn't make every conversation a competition. The person who isn't constantly trying to top your story. You climbed a mountain? Cool. They don't immediately respond with, "That's nothing. I climbed 3 mountains while carrying a refrigerator." They let your story breathe, which sounds simple, because it is. Simple and rare. Now, here's the part people don't like hearing. Charm requires a small amount of ego death. Not full ego death. You're not becoming a monk. You're not moving into a cave. You can still have opinions. You can still tell stories. You can still be funny. But you have to stop treating every conversation like an opportunity to prove your value, because that's exhausting for you and everyone around you. Ironically, the less desperately you try to seem impressive, the more people tend to like you. It's one of those annoying truths that sounds fake until you see it happen. Kind of like sleep. The harder you try to force it, the less likely it is to show up. Now, let's make this practical. The next time you're talking to someone, try 3 things. First, spend more time noticing than performing. Second, follow curiosity instead of strategy. Stop asking yourself what the perfect thing to say is. Ask yourself what you're genuinely curious about. It's easier and surprisingly more interesting. Third, leave space. You don't have to fill every silence. You don't have to entertain every second. Sometimes people just need half a second to think. If you're constantly jumping in, conversations start feeling crowded, like too many people trying to get through the same doorway. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. This sounds way too simple. That's because it is. Most social skills are. The problem is not understanding them. The problem is actually doing them. Everyone knows they should listen more. Almost nobody does. Everyone knows they should stop making conversations about themselves. Almost nobody does. Everyone knows people like feeling understood. Almost nobody makes the effort. That's why these ideas work. Not because they're complicated, because they're uncommon. And here's the weird thing. Once you stop trying so hard to be charming, you become a lot more charming, because people can feel the difference. They can feel when you're trying to win them over, and they can feel when you're simply enjoying the conversation. One creates pressure, the other creates connection. So if you want to be more charming than a drunk comedian, stop focusing on how you're coming across every 5 seconds. Stop trying to manufacture charisma. Stop treating conversations like performances. Point the spotlight outward. Get curious. Pay attention. Make people feel seen. Because at the end of the day, the most charming people aren't the ones who leave every conversation thinking, wow, I was amazing. They're the ones who leave people thinking, wow, I really like talking to them. And if that sounds almost disappointingly simple, good. The things that actually work usually are.